Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Ben Francis and this evening we are joined by Maureen Watt. Hi Maureen, how's it going?
Hi Ben, I'm fine. How are you? Enjoying this lovely weather, but I think it's stopped now or coming to an end.
Yeah, it was very short-lived. It's like one day of 23 degrees and now it's like 14 again. But I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I'll start today's show off as per usual these days with an update on the latest developments in the Middle East. At least 52,418 Palestinians have been killed and 118,000 injured in the Gaza Strip since the 7th of October, according to the Gaza Health Authority. Israeli attacks have killed at least 18 people in Gaza over the last 24 hours, according to the ministry. Also in the news, Qatar's ambassador to the Netherlands told the ICJ that rather than ending its illegal presence in the occupied Palestinian territory, Israel has continued its genocidal war against the Palestinian people and increased settlement efforts in the occupied West Bank. Palestinians in Gaza continue to face famine-like conditions as Israel continues to block the deliverance of any life-saving aid. Israel has jeopardized the existence of UNRWA, the backbone of humanitarian and developmental assistance in the occupied territories. Israel has, quote, created and perpetuated a humanitarian disaster in Gaza through acts such as the weaponization of aid as a, quote, method of war and the systemic targeting of humanitarian aid workers. Israel completely reversed progress on the humanitarian situation in Gaza when it cut off all access to food, water, and humanitarian aid into Gaza on the 2nd of March, an act of, quote, collective punishment. Israel is destroying, quote, an entire generation of Palestinians in Gaza, according to the ambassador. Also, the WHO's executive director, Michael Ryan, has implored the international community to act as Gaza's children suffer under a crippling 2-month blockade. Quote, we are breaking the bodies and minds of the children of Gaza. We are starving the children of Gaza. We are complicit, Ryan told reporters at the WHO's headquarters in Geneva today. As a physician, I am angry. It's an abomination. At least 16 civilians and security officials have been killed in clashes in a town near the Syrian capital of Damascus, Syria's interior ministry reported on Wednesday, the second consecutive day of fighting in Druze majority areas around the Syrian capital. Israel has said it will protect the Druze population in southern Syria, an offer that Syria's Druze population have said they have not asked for. So, Maureen, what do you make of both what's happening in the Palestinian territories and the latest developments in Syria?
Well, I think in in Palestinian territories, including Gaza, it is very clear now that Netanyahu will stop at nothing other than completely obliterating Gaza and its citizens. We don't hear much about how many citizens are fleeing to other countries or other parts of Palestine. But to me, it seems like, you know, if they stay, they're going to be killed. And I thought I heard on the radio that Netanyahu now thinks that the obliteration of Gaza is more important than freeing the hostages. And he seems to forget that that was the original intention of going into Gaza, was to free the hostages. And we haven't heard anything about the hostages or about them being freed for weeks now. And clearly that is not his top priority. I just sincerely hope that all those involved in humanitarian issues and war crimes are documenting and keeping records of everything that Netanyahu and his government have done, because I doubt in anybody's minds, excuse me, they could think they're anything other than war crimes. In terms of the rest of Palestine and going into Syria,
Yeah.
I can't understand why Netanyahu is doing that unless it's some agreement he has with Trump or something. But, you know, the last thing Syria need is outside intervention. I think the principles and the ideas of the government are legitimate. I think they want peace. I think they want to bring all the different factions together, and any interference from outside, I think, is the last thing that they need.
Do you think the government is going to end up being successful in that endeavour in Syria?
I don't know. I think, there are people who want chaos rather than peace in the world, whether it's in your country or anybody else's. But I do think the intentions, as I said, are legitimate and worthwhile respecting. I think only if they're not, then, we will see uprisings among different parts of Syria, and different peoples have control different parts. But I think, given that in the early days that they managed, for example, to get the Kurds on board, I thought that was really significant. And as I say, I think it's got to be given a chance to bed down. Too often, the West gets involved in countries like Iraq, for example, and Libya, destroys dictators, and then there's a vacuum, and there's no one there to create a system of stable government. So I think in this case, Syria has got to be given a chance. I think, if there was, for example, evidence that the former president and his friends were trying to stir it up, then I think that would be a cause for concern. But my personal view is that we should see what this government does. They've said the right things about women and girls and things like that. So we just have to wait and see.
Yeah, no, they do have a good record in terms of what they're saying. But on the flip side, I think the leader was the former second in command of the Islamic State in Syria, so he also has a record. But I guess, well, let's hope it goes well in Syria. Looking at the time...
Well, sometimes some people do change their minds.
Oh, sorry, we could talk about that for much longer. I sort of segued a bit, but looking at the time, we are eating into the Ukraine update, so I'll just go ahead with that now. So for the Ukraine update on day 1163 of the conflict, Kiev and Washington have signed a deal that would share future revenues from Ukraine's minerals with the United States to keep military aid flowing to the country, as well as US investment into its defense and reconstruction. Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal shared details of the deal, saying a new reconstruction and investment fund would be split 50-50 between Kiev and the United States and give each side equal voting rights. The deal would relate only to new investments, the Prime Minister said, meaning it would not provide for any debt obligations against Ukraine, a key concern for Kiev that America was previously proposing. Ukraine would retain, quote, full control over its mineral resources, infrastructure and natural resources, the Prime Minister added. The deal would ensure revenue by establishing contracts on a take-or-pay basis. Ukraine's first Deputy Prime Minister said there would be no change to the ownership of state-owned assets, including Ukreinnafta, Ukraine's largest oil producer and nuclear energy producer. Income and contributions to the fund would not be taxed in the United States or Ukraine, she said, to make investment yields the greatest possible. Vladimir Putin has said some small groups of Ukrainian soldiers were still held up in basements and hideouts in Russia's western Kursk region, speaking at an event in Moscow on Wednesday. The Russian president claimed radio interceptions suggested that the few Ukrainians left behind were asking commanders to be evacuated. The European Union is preparing a plan B on how to keep its economic sanctions against Russia should the US abandon Ukraine peace talks and seek reapproachment with Moscow, according to the bloc's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas. Quote, we see signs that they are contemplating whether they should leave Ukraine and try to get a deal with the Russians because it's hard, Callas told the Financial Times. The Kremlin claimed Putin was open to peace despite its continuing aggression on Ukraine, but claimed that the conflict is so complicated that the rapid progress that Washington wants is difficult to achieve. And lastly, Russia and North Korea have begun construction of a road bridge between the two countries as part of an effort to strengthen their strategic partnership. Russia's Prime Minister said, it comes after South Korean lawmakers said about 600 North Korean troops had been killed in Ukraine while fighting for Russia. So, Maureen, I feel like the main story there is the peace deal. There's been a minerals deal that's been signed between Ukraine and the United States. So I've got two questions. I want to ask what your view is on the deal itself, and do you think it's a good deal for Ukraine? And secondly, like in terms of the peace process, America is obviously touting this as an important step into obtaining peace. So do you think that the deal will help give Ukraine some sort of stability after the war, and therefore mean, it might, be more engaged in the negotiations and make more concessions, and we might see peace?
Well, I think I would offer a number of observations. One is that we've got to remember that Trump said that he would get this war ended within a week or whatever, and we're now 100 days, 24 hours and then a week. We're 100 days in now. This is what he's come up with. So he was desperate to have something that he could say that he's got a deal. And also, whether you believe me or not, I think that something happened between Trump and Zelensky when they met in the Vatican. Whether it was the surroundings or whatever, I don't know. But I do think something definitely changed there, because we're now seeing one of the aspects of the deal is that the US shows a tougher attitude towards Putin. On the deal itself and all the talk of minerals and oil and gas, is this a way of saying to Putin, well, you're not getting it, we'll take it, but you're definitely not getting your hands on any resources of Ukraine, which could be pretty significant. And you mentioned that, some army or defense, Russian defense forces are already pulling back because, the US doesn't need oil and gas. Or is it you going to use that oil and gas to influence things in Europe? That could be one thing. And in terms of the minerals, are we going to see large American corporations going in there in big numbers to exploit that? I'm not very sure. So the US commitment, I think, is one of the aspects of the deal that's back on the table, but also that the US could still walk away. So I think the next important step is that the ceasefire for at least 30 days, which Zelensky is asking for, should happen. But I think in terms of negotiations and dealing, the ball is now clearly back in Putin's court. So we'll have to see what happens.
So looking at the time, we'll move on to our first story of the night. Scottish Parliament debates Scotland's hydrogen future. The Scottish Parliament has voted in favour of supporting Scotland's hydrogen future, with MSPs backing the motion, unnamed, by 113 votes to 6 during a debate at Holyrood earlier today. The Scottish Government has confirmed that 11 projects will receive a share of £3.4 million of funding aimed at accelerating the development of Scotland's hydrogen economy. The investment will support green hydrogen production as well as improvements to the supply chain, transport and storage infrastructure. The funding is part of efforts to position hydrogen as a key component in achieving Scotland's legally binding target of reaching net zero emissions by 2045. The projects were selected following a funding call launched in September 2024, offering match funding grants of up to 50%, capped at £2 million per project. Delivery of the scheme is being managed by Scottish Enterprise. Ministers have described hydrogen as central not only to Scotland's energy transition, but also to an industrial opportunity of national significance. The Scottish Government's strategy includes a focus on creating long-term skilled employment and ensuring that regions traditionally reliant on fossil fuel industries are included in the transition to a low-carbon economy. Hydrogen, particularly when produced using renewable electricity, is viewed as a potential replacement for fossil fuels in sectors that are difficult to decarbonise, such as heavy transport and certain industrial processes. The Scottish Government is aiming to scale up both domestic production and export capacity. The announcement forms part of a broader energy policy direction that also includes major investment in offshore wind. Together, these sectors are expected to contribute to energy security, economic development, and the achievement of climate change targets. So, Maureen, what do you make of hydrogen fuel? How big do you think it will be in Scotland's future?
Well, I caveat all this by saying that I'm not really very knowledgeable about hydrogen, although I do know that Scottish Renewables, probably a year or two ago now, said that Germany were really keen to get their hands on Scotland's hydrogen potential. So I think this is a key milestone in terms of Scotland's move towards net zero. I know that there are many people involved in projects to roll out hydrogen across the rural areas, and you mentioned that in your piece. And I think it is important in our move away from fossil fuels. And if it can be used, for example, in heavy transport and in heavy industry, like you said, to replace gas, then I think that's those are great moves towards, as I say, moving away from oil and gas. You did say that the vote was 2-6. Now, I wonder if the 6 must have been the Greens. So I'm wondering why they're not in favour of this. But it does show, even after the debacle at First Minister's questions today, when Russell Finlay went on about the Scottish Government being very anti-oil and gas, that the Tories seem to have backed this resolution. So there's an example of how they are all over the place.
Well,
but yes, I think this is a significant move.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the Greens' rationale maybe that is like, because I've heard some environmental groups saying this maybe a distraction, because wind and stuff are more, I guess, sort of like guaranteed forms. I don't know if I agree with that personally, but as I said, I don't know much about the topic. I don't know the science of it specifically either.
Yes, like they're anti-carbon capture and storage and other things that I think the vast majority of people think are important. Not just one or two strands moving towards renewable energy, but capturing all Scotland's resources to move towards net zero.
No, yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think you need a broad approach.
If we don't do it, other countries will do it, and I think we have got a huge potential in terms of exporting and getting paid eventually with independence for all our resources.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's a very ambitious target to get to net zero. I think you should really have all options open. I think narrowing yourself into, just wind, it seems a little reductive. But looking at the time, I'm a bit over, so I'll rush to the next story on the English council and local elections. Polling has opened today across England for local councils, six mayoral posts and a parliamentary by-election, marking the first major test for the British Labour government since taking office. Elections are taking place in 24 English councils, 6 mayoralties and in the Runcorn and Helvby constituency near Liverpool. The by-election was called following the resignation of the sitting Labour MP for assaulting a constituent. Reform UK is considered the frontrunner in the seat, which was previously held by Labour with a majority of nearly 15,000 and was one of Labour's top 20 safest seats. If reform succeeds, it would represent a significant shift in voter behaviour in traditional Labour areas. The Populist Party is also standing candidates in mayoral contests, including new regional posts in Greater Lincolnshire and Hull and East Yorkshire. In Greater Lincolnshire, Reform's candidate, former Conservative MP Andrea Jenkins, is considered a strong contender. Success in these areas could increase the party's influence on UK politics and raise questions over the direction of national politics, including decisions that will impact Scotland via UK-wide legislation. Conservative losses are expected, particularly as many of the seats up for election were last contested in 2021 when the Conservative Party was running high under Boris Johnson. A poor result may lead to renewed pressure on the current leadership of Kemi Badenoch. Liberal Democrats and Greens are also hoping to make gains as voter frustration with the larger parties continues to build. More than 1,600 council seats are being decided, including 14 county councils, 8 unitary authorities, 1 metropolitan council, and the Isles of Scilly. Results for... Scilly, Isle, not Sicily, sorry, that's Nelly. Results from the by-election and some mayoral contests are expected overnight, with most council results likely to come in through Friday. While today's votes do not affect Scotland directly, the political consequences at Westminster could have knock-on effects for Scotland through future UK government policy decisions. So, Maureen, what do you make of, in particular, Reform UK's rise?
Well, clearly, voting is still ongoing, and we won't know the effect until probably this time, the full effects until this time tomorrow, although the Runcorn by-election is, I think, counting through the night, and I don't think I'll be staying up for it. I think what psephologists will be looking at is the turnout. Will the turnout be as good as the last time England went to the polls for local authority elections, or will it be down, showing increased apathy, or will those who've been apathetic in the past turn out for reform, and will reform's votes come from the Tories mostly, or the Tories and Labour? I mean, Labour can get away with it saying, well, you know, the government's had to take tough decisions and we're midterm, and you know, people are obviously going to not vote for Labour. They can get away with saying that. The Tories are in a more difficult position, and maybe Kemi Badenoch, given the Tories and how they love backstabbing, her position may be under threat. So I think those who are doing the programme tomorrow night will have much more to speak about on this topic.
Do you think, even before the results came in, do you think like British politics have now changed, like from even like a couple of years ago? Do you think like do you think we're still a two-party system like the United Kingdom, or do you think reform is now likely established, and the Greens even?
Well, remember, you know, England focuses mainly on what happens in Westminster, and Reform have 5 MPs in Westminster, and the Greens have 1 or
4,
2, I think. Right, okay, maybe 4. So, you know, that is the focus mainly of Westminster governments, who's in that chamber. Whether they're that concerned about what happens in local councils, I'm not so sure. But, you know, it'll be interesting to see if, for example, Reform took control of 1 or 2 councils, what difference that would make in those areas. And then you'd get an idea of what Reform is all about, because they stand on a ticket of, we're going to change everything, but they never say what they're going to change, apart from the fact that they want to dismantle the NHS, which they don't talk about very much, although that is part of their policy. So it will be interesting to see what a reform council-led, English council will look like. Will they privatise services like bins? It's really will be interesting to see, will they sell off council assets and that sort of thing to lower people's taxes, a la Trump, So, it'll be interesting to see.
Just quickly before we move on, do you think if Reform do well in the election, do you think that could translate into them doing well in the Scottish election in 2026? Do you think they could perform better than expected?
I still think they're a pretty unknown quantity in Scotland. They haven't got someone who's the obvious leader, and they haven't done particularly well in recent council by-elections in Scotland. So I think, maybe looking to see what their share of the vote will be in Hamilton, Hamilton by-elect, Stonehouse and Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election may be interesting. But I don't think we're able to get a complete read across from what happens in England with Reform will be replicated in Scotland.
No, that's fair, yeah. I think we'll find out a lot more in June. Yeah, I agree with that. And looking at the time, I'll move on to the next story. Boundaries Commission submit second review of Scottish Parliament boundaries to Scottish Government ministers. The Boundaries Commission for Scotland has submitted final recommendations for new Scottish Parliament constituencies to ministers on the 30th of April ahead of planned changes for the 2026 Scottish election. The review, required under the Scotland Act 1998, proposes updated boundaries to reflect population changes and ensure constituency in the number of votes per MSP in Scotland. If approved by the Scottish Parliament, the new map will be used in the election scheduled for the 7th of May 2026. It will not apply to the upcoming by-election in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse, set for June this year. The recommendations include 70 revised constituencies of roughly equal electoral size, taking into account local authority, boundaries, geography, community links, and the impact of any changes. The report also maintains 8 election regions, with adjustments made to 7 of them. Minimal changes were proposed for the Highland and Islands region due to its unique geographical challenges. Since the second review began in September 2022, the Commission has held 5 rounds of public consultation and 7 local inquiries across Scotland. These included feedback on proposals for 27 constituencies and several electoral regions, with inquiries held in Falkirk, Paisley, Whitburn and other locations. The most recent consultation period closed in April 2025. In total, 45 of 73 constituencies and 7 out of 8 regions were affected by the proposed change. Despite this, the overall number of MSPs will remain at 129. The Commission noted that balancing constituency sizes was a key priority, especially in light of internal migration within Scotland. Large rural seats like Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross, which cover vast areas but have few voters, continue to pose a challenge in maintaining equal representation. The final decision now rests with the Scottish Parliament, which must approve the recommendations before they come into force. So, Maureen, what do you make of the process and the new make-up for the next election?
Well, I think it's it is the case that this has to be done every so often to reflect changes in the populations of various constituencies. You see, for example, over time that the number of constituencies in what we would call the centre part of Glasgow has reduced as people moved to the outskirts. We've seen huge increases in population outside Edinburgh and the likes of Linlithgow, Livingston and places like that. So it has to happen. I think the only real bone of contention in Aberdeen area is that the constituency that I used to represent, which was Aberdeen South and North Kincardine, has been renamed Aberdeen Deeside and North Kincardine, which is very confusing to locals and will probably be confusing to people outside, because to most of us, Deeside refers to Upper Deeside, where Balmoral and Crathy Church and things are. So I think people might get confused that Deeside is still within the boundaries of Aberdeen City. Why that change had to happen, I'm really not very sure. So there are these kind of anomalies that people it does upset people locally, but what effect it will have electorally, I just think we have to wait and see. But I think, candidates in some constituencies will have to do a lot more work, because they will have areas within the constituency that they haven't had previously, and these voters will need to be contacted by the candidate and his and her team before May 2026.
So moving on to our next story, calls for delay or compensation ahead of radio teleswitch service switch off. Around 135,000 households in Scotland, many in rural areas not connected to the gas grid, face higher energy bills from 30th of June 2025 due to the planned switch off of radio teleswitch service matters. RTS meters currently help manage electricity use by automatically switching tariffs off during peak times, particularly important for homes that rely on electric heating. The technology operates through signals broadcast over the BBC's long-wave service. With RTS due to shut down, affected households will need to switch to smart meters to maintain similar energy tariffs and avoid paying additional bills. The Scottish Government has raised concerns with Ofgem about the pace of smart meter installation and the impact on households if no action is taken before the deadline. In particular, there are fears that households without an upgrade could face service disruption or unaffordable energy costs. Although energy suppliers are responsible for replacing meters, progress has been uneven across regions, with time running short. Calls have been made for either a delay to the RTS switch-off or compensation for affected households who have not yet received a smart meter through no fault of their own. The issue is especially pressing in Scotland's rural and island communities, where alternative heating options are quite limited. The Scottish Government has pressed for further support and coordination from the UK Government and Ofgem to ensure that the transition does not penalise customers who are already at risk from fuel poverty. Unless a solution is found before the end of June, tens of thousands of households could be left without access to affordable heating, prompting further concern about energy inequality and infrastructure readiness in Scotland's most remote and rural areas. So, Maureen, what do you make of the whole situation, and how do you think we can work to amend it, or the Scottish Government can work to amend it?
Well, it is the energy company's responsibility here, and I have to say, first of all, or Ofgem's in overall charge of it, I have to say two things. One is there have been a huge number of adverts on TV and radio about the need to switch over. And I would find it hard to think that some people haven't heard of it and are not aware of it. Secondly, I do think the energy companies were very tardy in getting started on doing the changeover to smart meters. And smart meters have, if you haven't got a smart meter, which we haven't, they phone you at least once a week asking to have an appointment to install a smart meter. But smart meters in many areas have got a very bad reputation in that they don't work or work sporadically, and your bills can be all over the place. So, and it does require you to have a good internet connection, I think, as well, as far as I can see. So I think there are going to be glitches and upset and non-connection in some areas. And I do think if that happens, there should definitely be compensation. And, I think energy companies, as I say, have been slow on doing the work, particularly in rural areas. I think they've had difficulty getting staff to do it, which is not good at all. But I hope that's not used as an excuse. You can always get staff from other areas to come in and do it. Yes, it'll cost you more in costs of digs and hotels and things, but this is really important for people, as you say, who often rely on one source of energy for heating and lighting rather than two sources of heating. So it remains to be seen, but I don't think the energy companies have been open and transparent about where they are and what they still have to do.
So moving on to our next story, Trump tariffs cause fastest slump in UK factory export orders in 5 years. UK factories reported a sharp decline in export orders during April, with manufacturing outputs and new orders falling across the sector as global trade uncertainty continues to weigh on demand. Data from the S&P Global showed that UK manufacturers experienced the fastest drop in overseas demand for goods in 5 years, partially driven by uncertainties surrounding potential US tariffs and wider economic instability. Export orders from major markets, including the US, Europe, and China, were down, with many firms citing weak client confidence and disrupted supply chains. The survey recorded a modest rise in manufacturing prices in manufacturing purchasing managers index to 45.4 in April, up slightly from March's 44.9. However, the index remains below the 50 threshold that indicates growth. Business confidence in the sector also fell to its lowest level since November 2022, and manufacturers reported job losses for 6 consecutive months. The impact of US trade measures, including a 10% blanket tariff and further 25% tariff on key imports like steel, aluminium, and cars, has created additional pressure on UK industry. These developments have led to concerns from business leaders across the automotive, chemical, and energy sectors who have warned MPs of possible widespread job losses if trade conditions do not improve. So, Maureen, what do you make of the tariffs, and how do you think we should be responding to them?
Well, first of all, the Scottish Government is not in charge of trade policy. So that is up to the Westminster Government. And I think what struck me in the past few days is how quiet the media have been in terms of the Chancellor's visit to the States and the outcome of that. We really haven't heard very much about what's happening. We shouldn't be surprised about these figures because Trump's tariffs have clearly upset everything and everybody. And it will take a considerable time, I think, for countries and companies to know exactly where they stand. But the problem is, in the meantime, companies, if they're not producing at the level that they have previously, will start laying off people if their goods are stacking up in their warehouses and not on their way to market. I suppose we are less vulnerable than countries like China, where it's going to cause a real upset and millions of people are going to lose their jobs. And we haven't really heard what China's response is going to be. And there haven't been talks between the US and China, as far as I can see, on a way forward on tariffs. So again, this is Trump creating the chaos that he loves to see around him and shows how powerful he is. And in the meantime, everybody suffers.
Moving on to our next story, Scottish Government publishes analysis of the consultation on reforming criminal law to address misogyny. The Scottish Government has published a summary of response to its public consultation on proposed new criminal offences to address misogyny, following recommendations made by the Independent Working Group on Misogyny and Criminal Justice in Scotland in March 2022. Chaired by Baroness Helena Kennedy, KC, the group had recommended the introduction of 3 new criminal offences: public misogynistic harassment, threatening or invoking rape, sexual assault or disfigurement of women and girls, and stirring up hatred of women and girls, as well as a statutory sentencing aggravation linked to misogyny. In response, a public consultation was launched in March 2023 to seek views on draft legal provisions. The Scottish Government received 243 responses from individuals and organisations. Most proposals received majority support, though a range of issues and concerns were raised across all areas. For the proposed offence of public misogynistic harassment, approximately 3/4 of respondents supported its introduction and its applicability in all public settings. There was general agreement that it would offer better protection for women and girls, though some called for clearer definitions and expressed concerns over proof and potential conflicts with already existing laws. On misogynistic behaviour, a majority supported the offence being applicable in private as well as public spaces. Respondents also called for freedom of expression and reasonableness defences, although opinions were split on whether these could create legal loopholes. Concerns were also raised about the difficulty of proving subjective effects. The offence related to threats involving rape, sexual assault, or disfigurement received strong backing, particularly due to the perceived rise in online abuse. Most respondents favoured a 5-year maximum sentence, while views varied on proposed legal defences. Support was also noted for a new statutory aggravation concerning misogyny, particularly to reflect misogynistic motivation during sentencing. However, some respondents felt this lacked gender balance or clarity. 2/3 of respondents supported an offence of stirring up hatred against women and girls. While intent was considered essential to the offence, concerns were raised over its defining and its impact on freedom of expression. Across all proposals, respondents stressed the importance of implementation alongside education, training, and cultural change to improve human rights and outcomes and ensure fairness in the justice system. So, Maureen, I just want to, a lot of people, or a lot of the, criticisms from the piece put out to the public are concerning freedom of expression. So, do you think this law could infringe on that, or could you give me some more clarification? What would mean, specifically?
So can we just put this in context for a minute?
Okay, yeah.
I think it was the hate crime bill that was going forward, and people called for more protection for women and girls in that bill. And it was decided by the government to have an inquiry into it, led by Baroness Kennedy, specifically on misogyny, and if necessary, bring forward future legislation.
Okay.
Now, the committee that deals with this, the Equalities Committee, has been really busy on other things. And as you said, there have been consultations on it. I hope, and I probably wouldn't say this in normal times, I hope that this bill is dropped in this Parliament and not brought forward. I think the tensions and the culture war climate that we're in will not reflect well on how a bill of this nature will go through Parliament. That's not to say that I detect a huge rise in misogyny among men and boys, where I wouldn't necessarily have expected to see it before. And I think it's a real issue that's developing. So I think a government after 2026 really needs to go back to the drawing board, take into account the situation as it is then in 2026 and going forward, and bring forward a bill that will reflect the situation that we're in at the time and going forward.
On the particulars of this bill, because I was just trying to work out what exactly it meant specifically when I was reading it. It talks about stirring up hate. Would that mean that making sort of like sexist, misogynist comments in public would be like illegal? Would that be a legal offence, or does it have a different meaning to that?
Well, I don't know in particular. I haven't read any details of the bill, but we know, for example, that there is a rise in domestic abuse, and if you're in, a gang or a group of men in the pub or at the football and think, that decrying women and girls is a great idea, then you're probably more likely to go home and be horrible to the women in your family. So there is a real crossover in this. And as I say, I don't think particular things can be seen in isolation. You've got to look at the fact that men see women as a threat, not as a group that should and deserve equality with men, but a group of people or individuals who should be allowed to reach their maximum potential. And that's not what's happening at the moment.
But do you think because this bill seems to me like, I agree with the morals of it, the morality of it, but it seems to me that it's legislating, again, I'm not sure if I'm reading it correctly, but it seems like it's making it basically illegal to, make hurtful comments, which seem to me like maybe an overreach from government. Like, is it government's role to be saying what you can legally and not legally say in terms of offensive comments?
Well, we've been here before in terms of racist language, for example. Are you saying that we shouldn't have that? And that women don't deserve the same or whatever? We are only a consultation.
No, but I mean, is it illegal to make a racial comment to somebody?
If it incites racial hatred and abuse and is offensive to the receiver, of course it is.
Yeah. Oh no. I mean, yeah. Of course, if it incites like abuse or like incites violence, but yeah. No, I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking like it seems like it might be going a bit like it seems a bit like vague in terms of like how far it has to go in order for a comment to be.
Well, in the meantime, men might want to self-reflect on their behaviour and that of their colleagues and their workmates and their friends when they're out.
Well, maybe some men, but I'm personally don't do that sort of thing. So not all men. I don't make sexist comments. Like I don't do that sort of thing.
No.
You just keep saying men, so well, not all men. No, I guess technically I'm part of all men. I am a man, I guess. But
Well, I think all men and women have a responsibility to root it out in our society. And that means talking to your colleagues, but it also means talking to your children, the boys and the girls in your family to root it out. Just like we try and root out sectarianism or, as I said, racism. It's the same thing.
no, yeah, no, I do agree with you in principle. I'm just querying sort of the law aspect of it and like is it illegal or whatnot. But
I think as I say, I think we're a long way from that. I don't see it being in this term of government.
Cool. Moving on to, because I'm a bit behind, moving on to our next story. New toolkit puts human rights at the heart of development programs. A new United Nations toolkit aimed at placing human rights at the centre of development programming has been co-authored by Strathclyde Law Professor Alan Miller and launched for use by UNDP offices globally. The Human Rights-Based Approach, HRBA, to Development Programming Toolkit is designed to guide United Nations Development Programme (UNDP) teams in aligning their work with the UN Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs), while ensuring that human rights principles underpin planning and delivery. It offers a structured framework to help countries address development challenges, reduce inequalities, and prevent future risks such as conflict on large-scale displacement. The toolkit introduces the PLANET model: participation, link, accountability, non-discrimination and equality, empowerment and capacity, development and transparency, as a basis for applying the HRBA in practical ways. This model encourages inclusive, system-wide engagement across society to balance different rights and interests in policymaking and program delivery. It connects directly with the Universal Periodic Review (UPR) process, linking recommendations from reviews of UN member states' human rights records with national development strategies. The toolkit aims to help countries implement those recommendations through development planning that meets international human rights standards. Professor Miller, a senior independent expert with the UNDP Crisis Bureau, is also advising the Scottish Government on proposals to adapt part of this international approach into a performance tracker tool for domestic use. This tool would help monitor Scotland's progress in implementing international human rights commitments and align them with policy priorities and SDG targets. So, Maureen, what do you make of the new toolkit? What impact do you think it could have?
Well, first of all, I think we should be really proud of the fact that it's one of our own, Professor Alan Miller from Strathclyde University, who has been tasked to develop this programme. That's a huge coup for Scotland. But I think it aligns with Scotland's record up there on human rights and development programs, even although we're not independent and can only act within the constraints of devolution. But already a lot of this, maybe not a lot, but some of this is in action in terms of how in Scotland money is distributed in countries which we support, going in terms from NGO to NGO rather than government getting involved. So I think if other countries were to adopt this, and it is a further refinement of the development goals in general, then I think this is all to the good. But I think it's really something as Scots we should be proud of.
Now we're going to move on to our last story of the night, a bit more light. Touring exhibition celebrating the Herring Girls opens in Wick. A new exhibition celebrating the legacy of Scotland's Herring Girls will open in Wick on Thursday, 8th of May at Nucleus, the Nuclear and Cathneth Archives, marking the town's historic role in the herring industry. Titled Following the Fish, the exhibition highlights the contributions of women who travelled around the UK gutting, cursing, and packaging herons during the fishing season, which ran from May to December between 1850 and 1950. The herring industry was a major part of the Scottish economy, with Wick once known as the herring capital of Europe. At its peak, around 6,000 women from Highlands and Islands were employed each season, often leaving their homes for months at a time to follow the fishing fleets. These women played a key role in sustaining the industry. Working quickly to process the catch within 24 hours, they became essential to fishing ports along the coast of Scotland and England, where they were known collectively as the Scotch Girls. The exhibition draws attention to the skilled nature of the work and the significant movement of seasonal workers it required. Some travelled by special trains, while others journeyed long distances on foot. The exhibition is a collaboration between High Life Highlands Archive Service, Suffolk Archives, the Norfolk Record Office, and Tagslan Nan Elan, supported by funding from Lloyd's Register Foundation. It features stories, photographs, and artifacts gathered through public contributions collected over the past years. Following the Fitch will also open in Ipswich, Suffolk, on the 22nd of May, and will tour locations across the Highlands, Islands, and further afield throughout the year. Further information can be found on the High Life Highland website at www.highlifehighland.com. So, Maureen, what do you make of the opening of the exhibition? It does sound quite cool.
Yeah, I think it'd be really good to see, and it's part of our history that all of us should remember. I mean, you talked about how the industry was kept afloat really by these women who followed the herring fleet. So while the fleet went round the coast following the herring, the women had to follow, as you said, on foot or crisscross the country. But it really went from like Ullapool and up round the north and then down the east coast all the way down. I thought maybe just to Hull, but obviously it went right down to Norfolk and Suffolk, which is absolutely amazing that these girls in those days travelled so far. But I hope the exhibition highlights the real hardship that these women and girls had to endure. I mean, imagine gutting herring all day, every day, standing up in cold, wet conditions, and then salting the herring after you've maybe cut your hands and getting salt in the wounds. And you see pictures of them with old rags wrapped around their hands while they still continued. Certainly wouldn't be allowed today in terms of health and safety work. So I think it's part of our past that people should really know about and look up where the exhibition is travelling to, and those on the North Coast 500 at the moment should really go in past Wick and have a look.
Yeah, no, it seems cool. It sort of inspired me a bit to try and travel up there. Who knows? Maybe I'll go and see it at some point. It seems like a good reason to go to the sort of far north of Scotland.
Yeah, but if it's travelling, you better watch. And I don't know if it's going back to be permanently in Wick or not. You need to have a look at the website.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't see if it was coming to Central Belt, but yeah, what do you think so? Yeah, but yeah, it will say on the website, as you say. Yeah. But looking at the time, that is all I've got time for this evening for Scotland to 7. So thanks to our guest, Maureen. But before I go, I just wanted to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everybody who has signed up to make a regular monthly donation, thank you very much. We were £16,000 short of our funding requirement in 2024, which has left us short of the money we need to pay our bills. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We have raised over £9,000 this year so far, £7,000 less than we need to be on target to pay our bills every month, and we urgently need to raise as much as £7,000 as soon as possible. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford just £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. So thank you to Maureen. Thanks.
Welcome.
Goodbye, and thanks for watching.